Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, What Has Gone Before. Part 1. The sole survivor of an ancient race, Kal, son of the scientist Jor-El and his wife Lara Lorvan, was sent to Earth as an infant mere moments before Krypton was destroyed. Discovered by Jonathan and Martha Kent, the newly renamed Clark Kent was raised as a human by his new, loving parents. After his father's death, Clark took his heritage and traveled to the Arctic, where he activated the Fortress of Solitude and spent 4 years learning about his now extinct race before returning to his mother's side. Approached by Charles Xavier, Clark and his mother accepted places at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted, Clark as a tutor/mentor, while his mother, by unanimous acclaim, became the goddess of the kitchen. Clark moved the fortress, concealing it underneath the manor and using the technology in it to create defenses that were effectively unbreakable, giving the inhabitants the knowledge that they were truly safe. Joining the staff of the mansion, Ororo Monroe, Storm, Logan, Wolverine, and Professor Xavier himself, Clark soon befriended the 2 students already there, Scott Summers, Cyclops, and Jean Grey. More students soon came to the mansion to join them: the teleporter Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, Catherine Pryde, Shadowcat, Anna Kent, Rogue, and Ororo's nephew Evan Daniels, Speak. At Logan's request, Clark helped to recover and heal Logan's old friend Steve Rogers, Captain America, who had spent several decades in cryogenic stasis. Xavier's enemies were not idle during this time. While gathering powerful mutants to become his acolytes, Magneto sent one of his lieutenants, the shape-changing Mystique, to gather younger mutants to counter Xavier's students. The 4 recruited mutants, Lance Alvarez, Avalanche, Todd Polansky, Toad, Fred Dukes, Blob, and Magneto's son Pietro Maximoff, Quicksilver, became known as the Brotherhood. Although they faced off against Xavier's students several times, they soon settled into an uneasy truce until the day that Pietro betrayed Mystique at his father's orders, attempting to kill Superman as he did so. Rescued from imminent interrogation and torture, Mystique officially, albeit temporarily, allied herself with Xavier's forces, reuniting first with her son, Kurt, then her one-time adopted daughter, Rogue. Her defection allowed Xavier to discover Magneto's plans and, with the aid of the Avengers, move to counter them. Magneto's flawed plan to transform the population of Earth into mutants using a kryptonite-enhanced energy wave came within seconds of wiping out humanity, but a new factor was introduced. Xavier's half-brother, Cain Marko, Juggernaut, was flung into battle by Superman and promptly seized the keystone of Magneto's plan, the Gem of Sidorak, the very item that had empowered Juggernaut years previously. The resulting explosions destroyed Magneto's plan, but he managed to escape with many of his followers. With the threat negated, the Avengers and the X-Men returned to their own lives. The 3 remaining members of the Brotherhood, since Pietro had fled with his father, returned to Bayville in a stolen plane, where they were met by Mystique, who decided to continue leading them, this time in a stance of neutrality. Superman chose to use the respite, as brief as it may be, to go back to what was once his home world to see if there was anything left that he could claim as his birthright. Juggernaut, freed from the induced rage of the demon Sidorak but still possessing its power, returned to Earth. Part 2. Using the lack of obvious threats to perform a mission of his own, Superman traveled to the ruins of Krypton where, as well as multiple pieces of salvageable technology, he also discovered 9 surviving Kryptonians on Krypton's sister planet Argos, held in stasis. Bringing them back to Earth, Clark met with the new students recruited by Xavier before encountering Squirrel Girl. Shaken by the experience, Superman brought his cousin Kara Zor-El out of stasis. Soon after, the newly named Supergirl aided Captain America in attempting to stop a plot by Magneto. Although they were less than successful, they worked together well enough that Kara afterwards accepted the offer of membership into the Avengers. During a mission conducted at the same time, the other Avengers discovered that a female clone of Wolverine had been created. Programmed to be an assassin, the mutant known only as X-23 was handed over to Xavier and placed in a modified training room while Xavier and Jean Grey worked to undo the mental damage wrought upon her. The tattered cloak of secrecy surrounding the existence of mutants was torn asunder when the anti-mutant and anti-alien group calling themselves the Friends of Humanity unleashed a weapon that they had been building in secret, the hunter-killer Sentinel robots. The first public outing of the Sentinels was in response to a crisis that the FA themselves had created, but the outcome they desired was prevented by the actions of the X-Men, rescuing the mutant that the FA had kidnapped and forced to go on a rampage. Soon after, over 100 Sentinels were sent to wipe out the mutant-friendly nation of Genosha. The Genoshans, led by Juggernaut, fought back, aided by the X-Men. Unbeknownst to them, a second wave was destroyed by Magneto and his newest acolyte, a less-than-perfect clone of Superman called Bizarro, while the other two groups which descended on Bayville were taken out by Squirrel Girl. Soon after, the non-human nocturnal sentients called the Gargoyles sought an alliance with the X-Men, and the mutant group calling themselves the Morlocks accepted an offer of refuge in the aptly named Undersea Dome Sanctuary. In an attempt at getting revenge, the anti-mutant Senator Kelly leaked Superman's true identity to the public. This backfired when several of the mutants at the Xavier Institute also chose to go public, gaining popularity due to their links to Superman. The plans of the Friends of Humanity took another hit when Magneto and his acolytes located and seized their main Sentinel factory, reprogramming the giant robots for a new mission, an assault on the White House. Timing the attack for when the Avengers were dealing with a problem in Asgard, Magneto led his new metal soldiers and the clone of Superman named Bizarro in an attempt to seize the president. Despite Bizarro fighting Superman, the Sentinels found themselves outmatched by the X-Men and the other mutants who had rallied to their call and were destroyed. Magneto himself was almost killed in an explosion, but was rescued by his son, Quicksilver. However, the attack was not Magneto's only plan, just the only one that had failed. His acolytes managed to seize the lab belonging to the mutant scientist Mr. Sinister and also managed to kidnap Susan Storm, delivering her to Latveria. The Brotherhood promptly teamed up with the Fantastic Four to rescue her, with several members of the X-Men and their allies aiding them in launching their assault and retrieving the Invisible Woman. Upon returning to the Institute in triumph, Clark proposed to Mystique. Magneto and Doom, however, were far from defeated. Chapter 2, Meetings. Magneto strode into the laboratory, Victor Von Doom by his side. The armored tyrant looked round curiously at the equipment that Magneto's acolytes were assembling under the guidance of Tech-Midge. Interesting. Doom mused. Some of this looks quite familiar. I acquired it from Mr. Sinister. Magneto explained and Doom nodded. That would explain it. He is one of the very few who can equal and perhaps even surpass my expertise in genetic engineering. Do you have the samples? Magneto nodded to one of the devices, a box-like affair covered in a thin layer of condensation and the occasional shard of ice. I have 4 strands of Supergirl's hair remaining, as well as a few drops of Superman's blood. We will have to be very cautious about how we proceed. Doom said slowly. How much of Sinister's work did you manage to retrieve? The clones he had in progress were destroyed, but we have managed to decode all of his notes and databases. Then that is where we shall start. Doom proclaimed. And when we are finished, I shall have my heir and my assassin. Supergirl is rather easily recognized. Magneto mused. Any clone of her would be identified as a target very quickly. A few years back, I encountered a mutant named Kevin Sidney. Doom shrugged. Although he managed to escape me, I was able to secure several samples of his DNA. He was a shapeshifter and I intend to give that skill to my assassin, that she may infiltrate any place to strike down my enemies. I believe that Sinister had made a great deal of progress in combining DNA with Kryptonian QNA. Magneto said thoughtfully. The concept of a hybrid is appealing, but I prefer to have a pure Kryptonian clone for my own army since altering the QNA may reduce the abilities of the final result. To each his own. Doom philosophized. Shall we begin? And now, the main story, the planned double wedding of the century. The anchorwoman said with a wide smile. America's greatest superhero, Clark Kent, will be marrying Raven Darkholme while the superhero/scientist Reed Richards will be marrying Susan Storm at the same ceremony, both of them being held at the Xavier Institute at Bayville. With a weather manipulator as one of Superman's friends, a bright and sunny day will be guaranteed. We now go to Matt Hicksville outside the Xavier Institute. Matt. Thank you, Debbie. Matt smiled, his elegantly coiffed hair barely moving in the breeze as he grinned at the camera. As you can see behind me, there are many supporters of Superman showing their approval, as well as many teenage girls who are rather heartbroken that their idol is getting married. With the last son of Krypton marrying the mutant who helped to protect the president. The screen went black and the bald man who had been watching it leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in thought. Well, this is interesting, isn't it, Smythe? Yes, sir, it is, said the young man in a high-tech wheelchair. Most of the superheroes will be attending that ceremony. The giant man behind the desk leaned back, one hand picking up the diamond-topped cane and caressing the gem at the top. Indeed they will be, which is why we shall not capitalize on it, he said, earning a surprised look. No, can you imagine having an army of angered superheroes descending upon you because you have interrupted their party? Smythe blinked, then shivered slightly. That would be problematic. Very much so. Wilson Fisk noted, then he leaned back in his seat. I will, of course, be attending that wedding. I can do no less as a respected pillar of the community. Of course, sir. Smythe said hurriedly. I assume that it'll be quite a party. I fully expect to see several others there. Norman Osborn, David Xanatos, Silvio Manfredi, Tony Stark. In terms of financial power alone, America's elite will no doubt be well represented. I think I'll need a new suit. White with gold thread trim. And diamond buttons. The door to the bank burst open as the quartet of masked men piled through. All right. One of them shouted. Let's get out of here before the cops show up. I don't think we need worry about that. The one in the lead managed as he came to a halt. The others looked round him and two of them swore as a very familiar caped figure turned to face them. Ah shit. Superman. A second, shorter figure in a jumpsuit and leather jacket appeared by his side and the leader sighed. And Superboy. Guys. I really think we should surrender. Hell no. The rearmost one shouted as he muscled past them, bringing his gun up. They're going down. He pulled the trigger and the taller of the two Kryptonians stepped forwards, his hands blurring as he caught the bullets, dropping them to the floor. After a few seconds, the gun clicked onto an empty chamber. Ah fuck. Language, please. Clark Kent smiled as the bank robbers slowly lowered their guns to the ground and raised their hands. Told you we shouldn't have tried to rob a bank in Bayville. One of them grumbled. But no, we had to do it. Sheesh. Awf. I wanted some action. A voice complained from above them and the robbers looked up to see Spider-Man perched on the wall, looking down at them. Yup. We're fucked. One of the robbers muttered. Damn it, I missed the fun. A metallic voice grumped as Iron Man landed beside Superman. One of the robbers shook his head as he raised his hand to show that he had a question. What is this? A superhero rally. How did you guess? A lady asked and the robbers slumped as Supergirl landed to their left. Hey, Psych, how's things? The robbers turned round to see Cyclops and several of his team. Doing fine, Kara. Martha has a plate of cookies waiting with your name on it. We'll just hand these guys over to the sheriff and be on our way. Superman smiled. Unless you want to try something else. The robbers all turned as one to look at the one who had tried to shoot Superman. The robber in question shrugged sheepishly. Nah, we surrender. Good. Said the sheriff as he walked up. Okay, can I have a couple of volunteers to help me get them into the cells? I can bemf them. Nightcrawler offered, earning several odd looks. He's a teleporter. Superman offered and several people nodded in understanding. You know, the gunman mused, I think we have a shot at being on telly because of this. Yeah. The leader snarked. America's Dumbest Criminals, Superhero Edition. Sheesh. And I managed to get one of the booklets. Tony said as they made their way to the Bayville High School's sports field. I don't know whether to be amused or angered by it. I mean, I play one practical joke and they respond with tip number 285. Superman snagged the booklet that Tony was waving about and flipped through it to the relevant entry. His eyebrows shot up and he read it aloud. SHIELD. Recruit survival tip number 285. Any comments made insinuating intimate relationships between Tony Stark and his technology are unprofessional and not tolerated on SHIELD premises. The director has had quite enough of new gear being purposefully designed with phallic motifs. Scott snorted with laughter, as did several of the others, and Tony tried, and failed, to look innocent. I'm quite fond of number 272. Agent Coulson said as he somehow managed to appear beside Superman. Clark glanced at him, then leafed back through the booklet to find the hint in question. Stop asking Stark what items he can weaponize, and just operate under the assumption that the answer is all of them. Wow, I hadn't noticed that one. Tony said, grabbing the booklet. Nice. Hey, Soups. You didn't adhere to this one. Number 78, dating supervillains is a very bad idea. Just don't. Clark read, then he frowned. I'm not certain that Mystique actually qualifies as a supervillain. More of a misguided hero. That's so sweet. Mystique said as she joined them and tucked herself into Clark's side. Thanks. Oy vey, he's as much of a Boy Scout as Steve is. Tony sighed. Where is he, anyway? He's joining us at the rally. Superman smiled. He and I are going to be the spokesman for the powered community. Senator Kelly is trying to stir up hatred against us, but my beloved here came up with a rather sneaky counter-argument that'll leave him unable to continue promoting his mutant hate agenda. All those speeches and discussions you've been giving have really paid off, haven't they? Tony smiled, then he flipped down the face mask of his helmet. Hey guys. A new voice said, and Johnny Storm landed in front of them, extinguishing his flames as he did so. Tony paused. It just occurred to me. He looks almost identical to Steve, albeit a bit skinnier. I noticed that a few weeks ago. Mystique said as Johnny looked at them in confusion. I did some research. Steve Rogers' younger sister is Johnny's grandmother. Wait, what? Johnny gasped. You mean Uncle Steve? Captain America paused as the call sounded. Pardon. Johnny ran up, dragging Susan. Sue, I just found out that Cap here is our great-uncle. Isn't that cool? I am. Steve asked in shock, and Johnny nodded. Yep, apparently your half-sister was born just before you became a Capsicle, and she was our grandmother. You're our great-uncle. Steve stared at them, then over at the distant Clark, who nodded. After another few seconds, a huge grin spread across his face, and he caught the two Storm siblings in a hug that lifted them off the ground. I'm an uncle. Johnny gasped, and Steve lowered them to the ground with a sheepish expression. Sorry. Susan giggled as the rest of the Fantastic Five joined them, then Johnny froze. Whoa! Green-skinned babe alert. Everyone looked round as Bruce Banner joined them with the mystery lady. Cap. Document. Steve replied, then he bowed slightly before looking upwards. Ma'am. Call me Jennifer. She laughed, brushing back her long black/green hair. Susan dope-slapped Johnny. Ow. What was that for? Pull your tongue in, you're drooling. Jennifer laughed as Bruce sighed. She's Jennifer Walters, my cousin. We got caught up in something, and the only way to save her was a blood transfusion, which I understand. Steve said. I had to give Nick Fury a blood transfusion once, which is why he is still so young. He looked beautiful. Johnny smarmed, only for Susan to dope-slap him again. What? Behave, Johnny. Sorry about my younger brother. He tries to hit on every pretty lady he sees. I didn't try to hit on Karsta. Johnny sulked, and the Kryptonian woman laughed. I think that the reason you did not was because you saw me rip a sheet of duranium in half. I can lift several hundred tons. Jennifer shrugged. You. Several thousand. Karsta replied, earning several shocked looks. What? I am a Yellow Sun-empowered Kryptonian. Even the Hulk can barely handle a Kryptonian. Bruce shrugged. Thank goodness they're all on our side. Don't say that, you'll jinx it. Johnny quickly replied nervously. The last thing we need is an invasion of hostile Kryptonians. What hostile Kryptonians? Bruce scoffed. There's Clark, Karsta, Kara, Chris. Do all Kryptonian names start like that? Johnny mused, causing a round of laughter. Jennifer looked round, then her gaze fastened on the blue and red-clad figure on the stage. That's Clark over there. Yep, that's him. Johnny agreed as he started to run. I'm going to say hello. Flame on. Johnny arced through the air, leaving a fiery trail behind him, and Susan shook her head. Sorry about my little brother. I keep hoping that one day he'll actually grow up, but... We understand. Karsta laughed, then she elbowed Reed. Oi, put that day top hat away, Stretchy, your fiancée is waiting for her hug. Reed jolted, then he quickly returned the slim computer tablet to its pouch on his belt. Excuse me, he said as he reached out, winding his arm around Susan's waist and pulling her close to him. Woof woof woof. Everyone stared and Jennifer shrugged. What? Just because I'm a 7-foot-tall green sexy goddess doesn't mean that I can't appreciate it when two people decide to show their affection to each other. Steve opened his mouth to answer, then he paused as a car drove past. Who was that? That? Bruce shrugged. I heard that a senator had agreed to participate in the discussions today. Chapter 3, Discussions. Superman stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd before him. Quickly checking that his holopad was set so that only he could read the words it was projecting, he smiled as Principal Kelly finished his introduction. Thank you, Principal Kelly. Good morning everyone and welcome to the first public debates about the nature and consequences of and for those with meta powers. I have already recorded the speech I am about to give. The discs will be on sale for production cost only, or you can download it for free, although I do ask that you make a donation to the charity of your choice if you do so. A susurration of whispers went through the crowd and Clark waited for them to quieten down. Let us first look at the archetypes of superheroes. The two primary archetypes are the Protector and the Avenger. The Protector's role is to support the law, rescue those in trouble and ensure that criminals are captured and delivered to the law enforcement services to be punished for their crimes. I have met one who is perhaps the quintessential Protector, Steve Rogers, or Captain America, a man who lives up to and then exceeds the legends surrounding him. The Avenger's role, however, is different. The Avenger acts where society and the law has failed. The path of the Avenger is a dark and twisted path, and it is only too easy to fall into the role of vigilante, killing without any true reason. As you can tell, in our society, protectors such as Captain America have an obvious place. The role of Avenger is far more problematic, and if someone sets out to be an Avenger, then they are doing it for all the wrong reasons. Clark paused and took a sip of water before continuing. Many people fear that those who have powers will abuse them. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely is the quote that they use. The quote is derived from a statement by the first Baron Acton, Sir John Dalberg Acton. His words were, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men. As a Kryptonian, I am perhaps the closest to invincible as you will find on this planet. Since I am aware of that, I made certain that I could not use it to do something like take over the world by ensuring that knowledge of how to defeat me, how to kill me, was placed with those whose job it is to protect the world from those who would seek to rule it. I have limited myself willingly, so that all know that there is no need to fear me, that I am here to help and protect. There are many who have powers and abilities which separate them from normal humans. These powers may be because they are extraterrestrial in origin, because they use technology, mysticism, or extreme training. It may be because their very DNA grants them new abilities. What is important is not what powers they have but how they use those powers. If they seek to aid others, that makes them heroes. If they seek to use the powers to steal, to rob, or to injure, that makes them villains. And if they just want to live a quiet life, then they should be allowed to. Several so-called villains I have met have taken that path because they were forced to, because they were shunned or hated simply for possessing powers. It is only too easy to drive someone into becoming a villain, and it is a situation that happens too often. Before you choose to lash out at someone simply because they have the ability to make things change color, ask yourself if your action is truly justified. Ask yourself how it would be if the situation was reversed. Clark looked out over the silent crowd, noting that most of them seemed to be at least not discarding his words without thinking about them first. Metahumans are not arbiters of the law. Clark said after taking another sip of water. We have the same rights and responsibilities as those without powers. We cannot legally act against those we think are going to break the law, nor should we be able to, for that is the path of the vigilante. Instead, we wait until the crime is being committed, then we perform a citizen's arrest and hand the perpetrator over to the proper authorities. The real issue, however, is when the criminals are powered. If they can materialize weapons, how can they be prevented from doing so? If they can phase, how can they be held? Each situation must be taken on a case-by-case basis. Often, the reason why a supervillain acts as they do is at least as important as what they do. And that concludes my speech. Superman finished. Senator Kelly, I yield the floor. Clark bowed slightly, then walked to where Mystique was waiting for him. You did brilliantly, she whispered. You really cut his legs out from under him. He was scribbling notes and alterations to his speech every time you made a new point. I have to ask, though, why didn't you use my argument? I'm saving it for if it's truly needed. Clark whispered back, noting with some amusement how Mystique's heart rate increased as the air from his whisper brushed past her ear. I think we should listen to Robert Kelly for now. I suppose. Mystique sighed as she turned her attention away from her hunk of fiancé. And the American public has a right to know who has powers. Kelly finished triumphantly. I can roll my tongue, does that count as a power? A voice called from the audience and Kelly frowned at the burst of laughter that followed. I can wriggle my ears. Where do I register? Another person shouted and the laughter increased. Kelly slammed his notes onto the podium, then closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. While Superman has made many good points, he started, his voice so controlled that only a few people realized how close to being enraged he was. There are still many mutants who will use their powers selfishly, against the greater good of America. Ouch. Clark winced. Whenever I hear the phrase greater good, I know that the person saying it usually means for the good of what I think should be. Agreed. Xavier said from behind them, causing Mystique to jolt in surprise. So that is why they should be registered. Kelly finished triumphantly. Thank you, brother. Edward Kelly said as he walked onto the stage. Now, if everyone will hold on for a moment, we will prepare for the next stage. I'm up. Roberto said, activating his aura as he walked onto the stage. Strolling to the raised platform and the podium fixed onto it, he lifted the platform up and then rose into the air, carrying the platform to its storage area behind the now bare stage. A moment later, he returned with a half-dozen chairs attached to a metal bar. Landing, he quickly detached the chairs and placed them around the stage before flying off with the bar, waving as he did so. Useful. Edward noted as the audience applauded the show of power. Robert, if you could sit over there. Clark. Superman rose from his seat and walked onto the stage, earning a round of applause. Moving to the seat that Edward pointed him to, he made sure to arrange his cape carefully as he sat down. We have several other guests joining us for this part. Edward said, then he grinned. Although I'm certain you guessed as much from the extra chairs. A round of laughter and scattered applause rose from the audience, then quietened down as Edward started to speak again. The other guests we have are Professor Charles Xavier from the Xavier Institute for the Gifted. Xavier touched the armrest of his hover chair and floated onto the stage, smiling gently. Tony Stark of Stark Industries. A roar of repulsors marked Tony's entrance to a round of cheering. Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America. The applause and cheering of the crowd was almost deafening as Steve almost marched onto the stage, pausing only to shake hands with both Kellys. And last, but not least, J. Jonah Jameson, primary owner and editor-in-chief of the Daily Bugle. JJJ strode onto the stage, his unlit cigar clenched between his teeth as he waved to the cheering crowd, then he nodded to Clark, glowered at Tony and sat next to Robert Kelly. Edward moved over to stand by the sole unoccupied chair. Now, I will ask for questions. The questions may be general, with everyone answering, or aimed at a specific person, but until everyone has had a solo question, they may not be asked another one. First question, you, Miss Amanda Sefton, student at Bayville. She said, one hand still resting on the shoulder of Kurt Wagner, who was smiling up at her. Question for everyone, how did you feel about Clark's identity as Superman being revealed? May I go first? Clark laughed as Amanda sat down again, having delivered the question that they had agreed on beforehand. How do I feel? Well, you must understand that for me, Superman was, or is a mask that I wear while trying to help others. The outfit is easily recognizable. But when my identity was disclosed, I was worried. Not for myself, although I enjoy being simply just Clark, but worried that those who hate me might choose to strike at my friends and family instead. That they may try to attack me and thus put others in danger. I worry that having everyone know that I, Clark Kent, am Superman, will bring danger to others. Clark sat down as the audience erupted in murmurs and JJJ frowned thoughtfully. Professor. I also was worried. Xavier said calmly. I had been aware, since even before Clark joined us, how much good he does in the world. Several of my students have their own powers, such as Roberto who helped to rearrange the stage earlier, and Clark is a shining example of what people can become if they are willing to use their gifts to help others. Although his mother, his sister, and his newly adopted son live at the Institute, I still worry that they may be targeted by those who hate Clark simply for what he is. An extraordinary young man who seeks to aid others. Tony. Hey, I went public and it hasn't hurt me. Tony laughed, then he sobered. Clark is far stronger than I am, far tougher than any suit I've built so far, so I didn't see the problem. Besides, if anyone tries to go for his family or friends, they'll have us Avengers coming down on them with the wrath of God. And given we have the son of Odin on our team, that's meant quite literally. The audience laughed at that and Tony winked at them before sitting down again. I stand with Tony on this. Steve added. Sure, he's arrogant, annoying, disregards orders. And those are my good points. Tony joked. But since I owe my life to Clark, I'll do whatever it takes to protect his family. I am certain that he would do the same for me and the family I have discovered I have. Mr. Jameson. JJJ looked up. Humph. Oh, right. He's one of the few heroes that actually deserves the name, but until now, I thought that someone who hid behind a mask couldn't be trusted. I had some bad experiences with masked men when I was younger, but if someone wears a mask to protect others. I'm still thinking about it. Thank you. Edward said, then he looked at his brother. Senator. Robert Kelly looked away from JJJ with a slight frown. I still believe that all those who claim to be heroes should be registered. And their families. JJJ growled. Interesting. Doom mused, then he glanced over at where Magneto was sat in a chair that was only slightly less ornate than his own throne. I believed until now that Xavier was a simple pacifist, but I see now that I judged him unfairly. He prefers peace, like Chamberlain. That demmed appeaser. Magneto snarled and Doom looked at him. Chamberlain had no stomach for starting a war, but he was willing to make a stand when needed, to take the fall so that his country could survive. Doom stated. I studied him and his successor. Unlike what you may think, the history of the United Kingdom is a rich and varied one with many lessons to learn. They held on to the largest empire in history and dissolved it before it could collapse into warfare. For a long moment, Magneto remained motionless, then he nodded reluctantly. Good. Now, how goes the creation of my son? He is growing and the neural programming you supplied is being implanted even as we speak. Magneto said, then he frowned slightly. I have to ask, why did you choose to not use loyalty programming? Because programming can be modified and I will not have my heir so weakened. But he may decide to overthrow you. If he tries and fails, I will know that he was not worthy to be my heir. Doom stated. If he tries and succeeds, then I will hand over all of my power for he will have proven himself. However, I intend to train him myself, to teach and raise him that he will choose of his own free will, Eric, to grant me his loyalty. And when I am too old to rule, I shall step down from my throne and my son shall rule as I have taught him. And my daughter. Growing as well. Magneto confirmed. Although I am curious about the source of the human DNA you used. My mother's remains. Doom said calmly, ignoring Magneto's jolt of shock. I believe in keeping power in the family. I still can't believe that you got old Grumpy on our side. Peter laughed as they relaxed in their seats, the wreckage of a Martha Kent meal in front of them. Before I joined you, he was convinced that I was a menace. Now, I never expected the Bugle to say anything good about me. Bigotry flourishes in the shadows and retreats from the light of understanding, Xavier said before taking a sip of tea. Hopefully, this will counter the growing tide of mutant hatred. So, what next? Do we open a business? Roberto asked with a grin. Mutant moves, for when you need your things moved in a hurry. A round of chuckles greeted his quip. Chapter 4, New Hero. Spider-Man cursed as he hurled himself through the air after the armored personnel carrier which had been stolen from the local reservist base. As soon as he had heard of the theft, he had gone in pursuit, passing the wreckage of several burnt-out vehicles that had been hit by cannon fire. There were several people being given medical care and at least one still form covered by a blanket a mile back. The sound of gunfire ahead of him told him exactly where his target was, and he used his webs to hurl himself high into the air. Spotting the armored car, he fired several web bombs at it, trying to entangle the gun, but it just tore through the sticky substance like it was wet paper. The cannon pointed at one of the cops who was shouting something on his radio, then the muzzle flashed as the projectile was launched, only to be caught by a suddenly appearing man in black and silver, a silver cape fluttering from the shockwave. As Peter watched in shock, the new arrival caught a second shell, then he flew forwards, grabbing the gun and ripping it from its mountings, bending it as he did so. Peter leapt towards the new hero just as the pintle-mounted machine guns joined the warped barrel on the ground, then the mystery figure ripped the side open and started to pull out the sweating criminals. Landing by him, Peter looked up as he spoke and found himself looking at a very familiar chin. Thanks for the assist, Clark. What's with the new outfit? I'm sorry. Your new outfit, Peter said, motioning at him. Man, it looks cool and all, but I really think I preferred the blue and red. We color coordinated. What does Martha think about it? Martha. Clark, it's me, Spider-Man. Peter said worriedly. You remember me, right? We talked at breakfast. Sorry I'm late, I was rescuing a fairy in New Zealand. A new voice said, and Peter did a double take as Superman, clad in his blue and red, landed. What happened? What the hell? The newly arrived Superman looked round and blinked in shock. I think we need to talk. Can you fly? Good, follow me. Peter watched them fly off, then a message flashed across his lenses. Baxter Building roof. Swinging through Manhattan, Peter noted the two figures talking on top of the privately owned distant skyscraper that was his destination. Using his webs to ascend the tower at high speed, he somersaulted over the lip, reflexively catching the kin that had been tossed in his direction. Glancing at it, Peter touched down on the wall and then lounged along it, cracking open the kin of Pepsi as he did so. How? The black-clad Clark asked. Spider-type powers. Clark explained. Peter, meet Kal, he's me from an alternate dimension. Explains a lot. Peter said in belated realization, lifting his mask enough that he could take a sip of his drink. So, is there a me there who hangs out with you? No. Kal said. In fact, I don't even know if you exist in my world. On my way in, I noticed that you were missing at least one city. What? Peter asked curiously. Which city? Metropolis. And I didn't see Gotham either. As far as I know, we don't have those cities. Clark confirmed before he took another sip. You know, I'll have to show you a map to see what's different. Hi, Clark. A new voice said as the door opened and Clark waved lazily to the new arrival. Hi, Reed. Kal, this is Reed Richards, also known as Mr. Fantastic. He's one of the greatest scientific minds on the planet in his stretching powers. Reed, this is Kal, my analog from another reality where he was adopted by a different family. Nice to meet you, Reed said, extending his arm, literally. Kal shook it with a wry smile. Plastic Man has similar powers. Oh, he a scientist too. Kal coughed. Actually, he's a reformed villain. Peter almost lost control of his powers as he laughed, both at the thought of Reed's alternate being a criminal and at how his expression went blank with shock. Reed and the others got their powers from an odd type of cosmic radiation. Clark interjected. They used to be called the Fantastic Four. Used to be. Kal asked worriedly and Clark smiled. They're the Fantastic Five now, they have a Kryptonian on their team. Where is Karsta anyway? She and Susan are out shopping. Reed said with a slight shrug. Susan's been very happy since Karsta joined us. Karsta. Kal repeated. I know of Akara. She was the first one I had revived from stasis. You have checked Argo for survivors, haven't you? I have. Kal said slowly. And Kara was the only one. Interesting. Clark frowned. Very interesting. Aha. Everyone turned to look at Reed, who was using one hand to type on 3 different keyboards while the other was making notes that spread across 3 whiteboards that flanked the door. Aha. Peter asked curiously as he quickly scanned the equations. What do you, oh wow. Have you taken the dimensional tension coefficient into account? Reed paused, then made a couple of quick alterations to his equation. Okay, now I need to contact Tony. With his help, we can create a portal. Whoa! Peter interrupted as he remembered something that they had been laughing about at breakfast. Remember Shield Agent Rule 336 in the newest booklet? Stop asking Stark to build portal devices. Reed recited. I know, but we really don't have much of a choice here. I'm going to get Forge to help. Peter decided as he leapt off the wall. We'll need all the tech help we can get. Diving off the balcony, Peter activated his web shooters and danced through the air as he headed to where he had stashed his bike. Another Kryptonian. Xavier asked in a voice which revealed only a trace of his surprise. Whatever next? Another Kryptonian? Cool. A voice said and Peter looked round to see Speak entering the room, an unopened pair of bottles in his hands. Hey, I picked you up one of those new drinks you like on my way back. Thanks. Peter said gratefully as he accepted the bottle of Powerade. Twisting off the lid, he took a deep swig. Ah, I needed that. Web swinging is fun, but damn, it leaves you tired afterwards. Speak raised his own bottle to his lips, then paused as an alarm sounded. What's that? A new mutant has activated their powers. Charles said as he tapped a couple of controls on his chair. The alarm cut off while a small circlet rose on a thin metal tentacle from the top of the backrest, placing itself over Charles's head. Now let me see, oh my. He's in Bayville, he's confused, almost feral. Xavier's eyes shot open. Peter, go. I'll link his location to your HUD, restrain him without hurting him. Peter nodded and, dropping his empty bottle, he sprinted out of the door and leapt onto his bike. Who is this new mutant? Speak asked, raising his bottle, then pausing in shock as Xavier answered. Dr. Hank McCoy. What? Spike screwed the lid back onto his own untasted bottle and stowed it in his rucksack. Prof, I may be able to help. I have already asked for volunteers to help Peter. Xavier said. Suit up. Speak sprinted out of the entrance hall. Peter's danger sense screamed at him and he somersaulted sideways, parallel to the ground as a pair of clawed hands sliced through the space that he had been. Unleashing another barrage of webbing, Peter watched wide-eyed as the blue-furred berserker ripped through the webs as if they had been made from tissue paper. Oh, come on. He groused as he somersaulted backwards, evading the attacking beast by bare millimeters. How the hell am I meant to deal with this? With backup. A voice called and Peter exhaled in relief as Clark swooped down and grabbed the rampaging beast's wrists. The furred monster tried to break free, then kicked at Clark. I got this. Kal swooped down and as if it had been rehearsed, Clark spun round, the sudden movement allowing Kal to grab the creature's ankles. Teach. I know you're in there. Speak shouted as he raced towards them on his hoverboard. Teach. Come on. You're not a monster. Come on, Teach. There's more stuff in skies and ground, Horace, than you dream in your thinking. McCoy flinched. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Evan. If you must quote the bard, please try to get it right. Worked, didn't it? Speak grinned as he coasted to a stop beside them. You feeling yourself now, Teach? I think so. McCoy replied cautiously as Kal lowered him to the ground. Once he was steady, Clark released his wrists. Oh my word. What? No. Your mutation activated. Clark said gently and McCoy shook his head. But, how? I've been keeping it under control for years, ever since I realized. Oh, this is not good. What's going on? Clark. A new voice asked and McCoy sagged in depression. Principal Kelly. Edward Kelly walked up and stared at the group, then behind them at the approaching members of Generation X. What's going on? There was this animal. It was an unexpected X-gene activation. Clark explained quickly. I assure you, the situation is under control and he has regained his mental balance. For whatever I did during my temporary insanity, I apologize most humbly. McCoy said sadly and Kelly stared at him. Hank? That you? McCoy nodded slowly. I fear that you may need to find a new science teacher. Why? Kelly shrugged. Because I'm a mutant. So are Roberto and Ray. Kelly said as he walked up to McCoy. I realized a while back that it doesn't matter if someone's a human, mutant, alien or whatever. Heck, after Clark was outed as being Superman, my staff were almost buried under transfer requests from people wanting to be closer to a hero. I'm uncertain my landlady will agree. Frank mourned and Clark placed a hand on his shoulder. I can offer you lodgings at the Xavier Institute. Even a hollow emitter if you want to appear baseline human again. I half vunzo I don't look like this. Nightcrawler said from behind Kelly. Kurt. ACH. Principal Kelly. I didn't recognize you. Kelly stared at the blue-skinned teen for a moment. Does Amanda know? J.A., she says I'm her personal plushie. Kelly blinked a few times before nodding. Hank, I'll expect to see you at school on Monday, assuming you don't have a mental relapse. Clark, if Hank can't make it, can you cover? I don't think I'll be needed, but I will. Clark smiled and Kelly looked at the assembled teens, a wry smile twitching his lips. It would seem that it is slightly more than a fifth that have powers. In my defense, I only said more than a fifth. Peter pointed out before remembering that he was still in costume. Ah, crap. You also said you weren't a mutant. Kelly pointed out. He isn't. He got his powers through an accident involving a genetically modified spider. Clark explained. Although I must ask that you not tell anyone who he is. I won't. Kelly said with a laugh. I don't want May angry with me. Phew, I'm parched. Speak sighed as he pulled a bottle out of his bag. McCoy's eyes widened at the label on the bottle as Speak began drinking. The last thing I remember is drinking some of that before. Speak. Stop. Clark shouted. Speak dropped the bottle. Wah, arg. Clark seemed to blur round Speak as bone projectiles erupted from all over the teen's body. Everyone else backed away quickly, except for Kal who joined Clark in shielding the onlookers. A moment later, Speak collapsed onto his knees, his head now partially covered in bony armor and spikes sticking out through his uniform. What happened? Kelly gasped in shock. I'm not sure, but until we find out, no one is to drink any of this stuff. Superman said firmly. But I love it. Peter moaned, earning a long look from Clark. Interesting. Peter, have you felt any change in your powers? No. Why? Just curious. Oh, man. Speak moaned as he stared at his bone-covered hands. How the hell am I supposed to explain this to my friends? Come on, Evangelist. McCoy said as he placed a paw on Speak's shoulders. We can get through this together. At least you still look mostly human. I look like a blue monkey. Gorilla. Evan said absently as he continued to stare at his hands, then he face-palmed. Sorry. Sorry. McCoy started to laugh ruefully. Chapter 5, Publicity. Wow. McCoy said as he looked around. This makes the science labs at school look like a child's sand table. We're quite proud of it. Xavier smiled. So, have you decided about tomorrow? I'm torn. McCoy said softly. On the one hand, I spent years keeping my mutation from fully activating for fear I'd turn into a monster. On the other hand, knowing that there are more like me. Kurt is torn as well. Xavier admitted. He has had many bad experiences because of his mutation, but Amanda adores him for who and what he is. McCoy nodded slowly. I think I will try. If all fails, you will always be welcome to work here. Xavier said reassuringly, then he looked round. Good evening, Martha. Hello. Martha said as she bustled in. Clark finally told me that we had guests, so I made some cookies. Xavier gratefully accepted the plate and offered it to McCoy, who accepted one of the cookies, then paused. You aren't going to say anything about Sesame Street, are you? He asked suspiciously. Check this out. Spike said as he frowned in concentration. An instant later, the ends of the spikes jutting from his bony armor started to glow. These things can cut through almost anything. Just like Logan's claws. Whoa! Ray said, thoroughly impressed. You going public as well? Gets loads of babes and I heard that we may be allowed to wear our uniforms to school soon. Hey, that means I'll be able to use my powers without risking shredding my clothes. Roberto grinned. More chances to show off. Carefully. Clark said from behind them and everyone turned to see Clark and Kal. Whoa, that is still freaky, seeing two of you. Ray admitted. At least he doesn't have a goatee. Clark blinked. What? They've been watching the original Star Trek series. Kal sighed and Clark's eyes widened in realization. Ah. Spock. Evil goatee. Right. I remember now. Hey, Clark. Kal, we got something. A voice called and both Kryptonians turned to see Tony Stark waving for them. Come on. Heimdall. Thor. Clark said in greeting. Behind him, Kal gave the two Asgardians a long look. We hath aided thine genius Forge and the Tinkerer Stark. Hey. Tony interjected. And have created a small portal through which a signal can be driven. Heimdall finished. Kal nodded. My systems are picking up encrypted transmissions, sending a comm request now. Link it to here. Tony said, pointing to a large screen mounted on one wall. Let's see what your world looks like and it'll let them see us as well. Linking now. Kal said, one hand touching the side of his visor and the screen lit up with a stylized JL symbol. A moment later, the symbol vanished, being replaced by the image of a large hall filled with screens and computer stations, all surrounding a hollow projector that was displaying an image of Earth. Although many of the people were wearing a uniform comprising mainly of a tunic and trousers, several individuals in unique costumes were staring at them through the screen. Kal. Batman. Kal replied with a smile. Can you backtrack the signal? It is coming through a dimensional microvortex. Said an armor-clad man with a sledgehammer attached to his back. We may be able to reconfigure one of the teleport gates to breach the dimensional barrier, but it could take quite a while. Steel. Kal nodded in greeting. Nice armor. Tony whistled. Did you build yours as well? Only the first suit. Steel said absently. This suit is modified ceremonial Kryptonian armor. Really? Clark asked curiously. I've never seen any reference to it in the Fortress archives. Different worlds. Kal pointed out. Clark nodded, then he frowned. You know, if we can make contact with one alternate reality, there are almost certainly others. I think I'm going to have to break out my final salvaged Type 6 embassy for this and use it to do some serious building. Maybe on the far side of the moon, thank goodness I have so much experience with environment domes. Kal and Batman exchanged confused glances as Clark continued to mutter to himself. Hey, Steel, right? Tony called. I'm setting up a link here, sending my readings on the microvortex. If I'm reading this right, it could be possible to make it larger, maybe to a couple of meters or so, but the increase in instability could be an issue. I agree. Steele said, then he half-turned. Gear. Get to my lab and power everything up. Jaeon, I need all the tech types we have reporting in. Red suit. What? Tony said in disbelief. Red suit? I'm Iron Man. Really? Steele asked curiously. Huh. Imagine that. I'm going to transfer the data link to my lab. I'll do the same. Tony said. Forge. Get your lab powered up, I'll get Reed to help. I'll go and help them. Clark said. You catch up with your friends. Thank you. Kal replied. Kal of El? Heimdall said in greeting as Clark entered the lab, looking around curiously. Heimdall. Clark replied. I didn't expect to see you here. A chance to open a gate to a new realm. Heimdall said with a slight smile. How could I refuse? We've got the main gates half built and the theory is good. Tony grunted from his position half inside one of the conduits that were wrapped round a stone slab 3 times larger than the ones used to connect to the Hall of Doors. Did I hear jets earlier? Kara and Logan have gone up in the Javelin to begin construction of the moon base. Clark explained. They took one of the spare doors with them to install once the embassy is dimensionally unfolded. Hey, Clark. Forge called. Project Rao's blessing is almost complete as well, it's currently producing the needed nano-machines. Excellent. Clark smiled. That project took a lot longer than I thought it would. Agreed. Forge sighed. Although getting quality control in place for mass production was a pain, the real problem was getting the interface idiot-proof without undermining the effectiveness. Programming in all the safeties so that they couldn't be overridden without specific code chips. Clark nodded. It has too much potential as a weapon should it fall into the wrong hands, but the number of lives it can save. Agreed. Forge said quietly. Agreed. What are you talking about? Tony asked curiously. Just something that'll really help a whole load of kids. Forge said quickly while trying to look innocent. Tony suddenly froze, then swore. Damn it. How the hell are we going to get the gate to Cal's dimension? Everyone froze, then a chime sounded through the fortress and the fortress AI spoke. A starship has appeared in orbit. It is broadcasting a message. Play the message, please. Clark said after several long minutes passed with no one moving. One of the walls flickered and an image of a white-haired man formed. I am Jon Snow of the organization known as Planetary. He said. My companions and I are here to seek out the wayward traveler known as Kall. Kall, if you have received this message, please contact us on this frequency. Your brother wants you back. Message repeats. I am Jon Snow of the... The screen blanked at Clark's handwave and everyone exchanged glances before Forge broke the silence. I guess that we have a way of sending the gate now. I guess we do. Tony agreed. Clark stared up into the morning light as Kal vanished above the wispy clouds, the gate held by the webbing of straps in one hand and Forge riding inside the passenger pod strapped to his back. Focusing, he watched as Kal flew into the strange starship which then accelerated into a strange reality rip. They gone. They are. Clark nodded and a large, blue-furred paw clapped him on his shoulder. Then I guess we should be going, Clark. Clark nodded, then paused at the sight of McCoy's wrist. Decided not to use the holographic imager. Well, I've been discussing it with Principal Kelly over the phone and he's given permission for all members of super teams to wear their uniforms as long as they are willing to act as prefects, providing help to the best of their abilities when asked. Evan has decided to attend without a holo watch as well. Clark snorted with laughter. So Generation X gets a taste of power and responsibility by upholding the school rules and helping others. Kelly's good. He'll be explaining it at the morning assembly. Hank shrugged. Oh, he asked if you could pop in to support it. Not a problem. Clark smiled. I hope he won't mind if I make an announcement too. Clark, Hank. A voice called and both men turned to see May Parker emerging from the mansion. The kids are almost ready to go. I'll meet you at the garage. Clark grinned, then he seemed to vanish. Now that's hardly fair. Hank grumped, then a blue blur raced past, causing Hank to suddenly vanish as well. May stared for a moment before sighing. I thought they were meant to be adults. Clark's still a kid at heart. Martha laughed from the doorway. Why else would he wear a cape and tights? May nodded slowly, her lips twitching into a smile. I wonder what they were talking to Thor about earlier. Martha wondered. The entire car park seemed to go silent as Clark, resplendent in his blue and red, stepped out of the minibus. A moment later, all the kids rushed towards him and he laughed as he shook hands and ruffled hair. Damn, he's popular. Raymock complained. He's been saving the world since before we joined the institute. Evan said as he clambered out of the minibus, carefully checking that his spikes hadn't snagged on anything. He's why I joined. I said I wouldn't unless Superman taught there, and guess who dropped in an hour later to offer me a place? Ray joined in the laughter, then looked round at the boy who tapped his shoulder. Yes. What happened? The boy asked, nodding to Evan who was struggling to carry his bag without impaling it. His powers matured. Roberto supplied as he walked past, relaying the almost true cover story that Xavier and Clark had supplied. He now has his own armor plating. Means that he can play football without needing all that padding. Cool. Evan half spun in pleased surprise as he heard the response to the explanation. And as such, I have agreed to this as it will help them become better heroes in the future. Kelly said, nodding towards Roberto, Ray, and Evan who were standing beside Superman. In addition, during the same incident that caused Evan's powers to fully mature, one of our teachers had his latent powers activated, giving him enhanced strength and agility. Please give a warm welcome back to Dr. Hank McCoy. The rising applause only faltered slightly as Hank walked onto the stage, then a voice called out. Cookie Monster. Hank face-palmed as the entire audience burst into laughter, then he gave Clark a strained look. Okay, calm down please. He said with a wry expression and the laughter slowly faded into an attentive silence. Thank you. First, I'd like to say thank you to Principal Kelly for not letting my change in hairstyle affect my employment. A laughing round of applause rolled across the field as Kelly nodded in acknowledgement. Second, if anyone is worried about having gained new powers, I am available to offer advice and a friendly ear. If I can't help, I probably know people who can, like Clark here. Clark waved at the new round of cheers. Third and finally, Hank said, I'd like to thank you all for your acceptance. Except for the one who shouted Cookie Monster. In addition, I am wondering what code name I should have for if I deploy with the X-Men or the Avengers. If you can come up with one, please write it down with between 1 and 2,000 words explaining why you think it would be appropriate. The winner or winners will get to meet the Avengers at Stark Tower while all entries will receive a t-shirt with their favorite Avengers logo on it, so remember to state your size and which one you want. You have until next Friday to hand in the essays and the winner will be announced the Friday afterwards. Thank you. The field seemed to explode with excited cheering and Hank stepped to one side, waving Clark forwards. Thank you, Hank. I also have an announcement to make. As you know, Mystique and I are getting married in 2 weeks' time at the Institute, and I would like to invite all of you and your families. Clark stopped as the audience erupted in cheers, whistles, and shouts of joy. As it died down, Clark resumed his speech. Other superheroes will be there as well as quite a few famous people, so I expect you all to be on your best behaviors. Food and drink will be provided for free, Mum's in charge of the catering so we can count on it being great. Speak, Roberto, and Ray all nodded with wide smiles. The ceremony will be at noon, the gates will open at 10. Clark continued. More details will be on the invitations that will be delivered soon. If anyone wants to earn some extra money helping to deliver them, please speak to Piotr this afternoon. In the meantime, have fun, and study well. As the students all cheered, Superman rose from the stage and circled the field, waving, before disappearing in a sonic boom, then a second boom echoed across the field. A moment later, a tall, well-muscled blonde landed and looked round. I seek Kall, where may he be? I'm sorry, what? Kelly asked in shock, and the blonde sighed. I am Thor. Then get Thomath Pyron. A voice shouted from the crowd. Thor blinked several times as the audience virtually collapsed with laughter. Am I missing something? The Asgardian finally asked in confusion. Check the description for the links to the author.